I am delighted to say that we've got Lisa McIlvenna with us today. Lisa is the Deputy Managing Director for Business in the Community Northern Ireland. There she is. Lisa's got so much experience and expertise in this field, working with our own business members at BITC. So we're looking forward to getting into that discussion shortly with you, Lisa. This is a 45-minute session, guys, so just a short webinar today. We're going to just have a very brief presentation and then get into the discussion with Lisa, and then leave some time at the end for some Q&A. So what I would ask everyone to do, if you have any questions, please post them, and we'll try and get to them before we close around 1:15 or so. Okay, so let's get started. So just firstly, a little bit about myself for those of you online that maybe don't know me. My name is Lisa McIlvenna. I'm one of the co-founders of SustainIQ. SustainIQ is a ESG sustainability reporting software solution that improves how organizations can measure, monitor, and report on their social, environmental, and economic performance. And our goal really is to help companies capture this information, use it in the boardroom, used by senior managers to really inform the business and make those strategic decisions and measure the impact that their investments in sustainability are actually having as well. So we'll touch a little bit more on SustainIQ towards the end of the presentation, but for now, I think we'll just kick off and get straight into today's webinar, commercial case for ESG. So first of all, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, I just really wanted to briefly look at understanding ESG, what it is, so that we're all on the same page. So ESG is effectively CSR, corporate social responsibility, CR, corporate responsibility, and sustainability repackaged. So ESG is more commercially driven, and it's centered on financial risk and return. And it's kind of very timeful in terms of the next 10 years or so with regards to sustainability, in terms of the amount of reporting that businesses are going to have to do, and how that is now linked to the commercial performance of businesses as well. So if we just quickly look at the ESG, and the E and the S and the G and what it all stands for and what it all means. Obviously the E is for environment, and that includes your greenhouse gas emissions, water usage, waste management, biodiversity, and particularly within construction, noise, dust and vibration, also conservation, and heritage, and so on as well. So it's really looking at your environmental performance across all of those areas. The S then is for social, and that's looking at your investments in your employees, in your customers, your clients, in your society, and in the communities in which you all work, and particularly in the construction sector. You know, it's how you embed yourself within that community during the time that you're on site, and how you really sort of maximize the impact, the positive impact you have while there. And then the G is for governance, and that's looking at the leadership within the business. It's looking at making sure that ESG sustainability is let me get everyone muted there. Apologies. The G is for governance. It's looking at the leadership of the business, and it's looking at the board representation and making sure that ESG is represented at board level. And that's very, very important now. It's looking at your responsible procurement processes around supply chain, the products and the materials that you're sourcing, making sure you have all those corporate policies in place, such as the Modern Slavery Act. Those standards, those industry codes of practice that we all have to work to. And ultimately, it's about becoming more transparent in terms of your company performance, and understanding your performance, so that you're taking the steps required to improve performance over the coming years, and so on. So really, whenever we talk about ESG, we would have just referred to it as sustainability, but we're now sort of referring to it as ESG, and that's really what we're talking about then. So just looking at the commercial case then for ESG, which is what the webinar today is really about. It has become so commercial. ESG as a term as well has exploded in the last 12 months. We're starting to see ESG managers being appointed within construction companies. ESG is very much on the corporate agenda for most board meetings now as well. So it really has exploded, and it's moving at quite a pace. And I suppose, in the past, certainly I've worked in construction now for 18 years, and sustainability was often viewed, not always rightfully so, but it was often viewed as a nice to have. And that's no longer the case. Commercially, having access to that accurate and reliable sustainability ESG performance, it's essential, critical actually, and particularly when we look towards the net zero requirements. And what companies are going to have to report on and disclose over the next coming years. So it is critical that we all have access to this information and we can use it day to day. And I suppose looking at what has changed, like what has been the main sort of driver behind this change with regards to ESG, what's making it so commercial? And I think if we look at the procurement process that again within construction that we all work to, particularly public procurement, but not just public procurement, obviously private-led schemes as well. For a while now, they've been including sustainability within the contract clauses, so we've all been signing up to them and we've all been delivering them, but that has obviously accelerated as well. Stakeholder expectations have obviously increased, and we'll take a wee quick look at what I mean by that as well shortly. The legal and contract requirements that we've all signed up to as businesses, and again, we'll just take a very brief look at the net zero requirements and how this is all impacting the commercial performance of our businesses. Okay, so if I just... Okay, so we just very briefly just look at the procurement process and how that has changed commercially for businesses based on ESG. So sustainability often accounts now for up to 20% weighting in a quality submission. So, if you're down to price alone and you're up against maybe 1, 2, 3 other companies, it's this other stuff that helps get you over the line. And if you've got ESG sustainability processes in place, you've access to that data, you can really front load your submission and provide the evidence that you're doing what you say you're doing, and hopefully secure top marks for that submission, and ultimately help win you that scheme, that project as well. But it is critical now that you start backing up your responses in those tenders with evidence, with data, and they expect to see it now, so they need to see those stats from historical projects, and in terms of your own performance, showcasing that you're able to come in and deliver a sustainable project, that you are a sustainable contractor, and so on as well. So you really need the data to sort of support that within the submissions. And in terms of what that might look like, looking at kind of current sort of focus. There's since September last year, there has again been a focus on carbon reduction, but those carbon reduction plans come in and they have to be completed in accordance with PPN 0621 and displayed online. So you'll find even some of your clients, even though you submit the tender, they're maybe going onto your website or someplace to find that you've actually displayed your carbon reduction plan online as well, in order to secure full points for that response. In terms of the social aspect of those tenders, again, it's important to provide the data to show that you're in terms of your performance around social return on investment, looking at the apprenticeship opportunities you're offering across the different projects and the different placement opportunities as well, particularly if you're using those national frameworks such as TOMS and so on, how you calculate that, and again, it's important just to be able to showcase that within your tenders to make yourself more competitive, make yourself stand out from the competitors. And then in terms of governance, again, showing how you're building responsible supply chains, and that you have got a supply chain that's ready to go with regard to products, materials, low carbon products, low carbon materials, as we move towards net zero as well. And a big focus as well in terms of how you demonstrate how you're upskilling your supply chain with regard to carbon literacy and so on as well, because there's a whole new language there that our supply chains have to get up to speed on. Looking then at stakeholder expectations, how they've changed, how they're driving the commercial case for ESG as well. Certainly clients are pushing for more transparency in terms of your performance, and they want to see that more, they want to see it made more visible to them as well. They're also looking for contractors to step forward and take the lead, and we're seeing that more and more, particularly in the net zero space as well. So huge opportunity there for contractors to become a lot more sort of leading on certain aspects of the net zero agenda. I think as well, companies are very aware that they're always looking to retain and attract new talent, and employees are now looking to work for more responsible businesses. So if you as a contractor have embraced ESG sustainability, then you're making that visible, hopefully will help with attracting new talent into the business as well. And also the public are more aware. So you'll find moving into new areas, they're a lot more aware of what they expect. And therefore it's important that you maximize that impact as well. There's also a demand for higher spec properties, and particularly around attracting FDI into the country. So we're seeing demand for BREEAM and LEED buildings, for example. Just an example there on screen, the Merchant Square office in Belfast sold recently for 87 million to a Saudi fund. BREEAM excellent building, and it's the largest deal ever in Northern Ireland for retail office space. So again, it just backing up the commercial case there for ESG. It's super efficient building, and it's going for that kind of price as well. We're seeing tenants looking for a lot more access to energy data within their offices as well, which is challenging the landlords, particularly those with older stock buildings that maybe don't have submetering, they maybe don't have a building management system. So there is a real challenge there for the property sector to upgrade, but then that in turn is providing an opportunity because it's driving the refurb market there as well. So opportunities to look at that. And then the regulatory requirements as well is definitely a driver, and making the commercial case for ESG as well. We're all probably now familiar with streamlined energy carbon reporting requirements, where companies over a certain turnover meeting certain criteria are returning their carbon emissions to Companies House for their financial returns. So they're linking emissions to company financial performance. So it's only going to go one way. We are going to be paying for our emissions, and therefore we've got a window now to reduce our emissions as much as possible and ultimately save ourselves money. And then on the back of COP26, we've seen the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, where the UK government has confirmed that large UK registered companies will have to disclose climate-related financial data coming from April 22. And, you know, that's been announced. And again, we haven't really heard a lot around that. There's a lot of companies, I believe, still unaware that's going to kick in. So there's going to be a huge impact there as well. But, you know, that UK government have definitely taken the lead with regards to their commitments around this. They're just a couple of examples of recent regulations that have come out where businesses are really now starting to feel the impact, particularly around the whole net zero agenda as well. And then just looking at that and what that means to businesses, particularly construction companies. I've already mentioned now the carbon reduction plans having to be displayed online as well, but it is essential now that companies understand that emissions is going to cost them money. Therefore, you need your net zero roadmap outlining how you're going to become net zero over the next 10, 15, 20 years, whatever that might be. But that means you need to understand your scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions, what they mean. That you need to understand that what you're producing, why you're producing, when you're producing, how much you're producing. And that all provides an opportunity then for you as a business to make strategic investments to ultimately reduce emissions and then save cost as well. So we're definitely starting to see these UK government commitments having an impact on business. So there's an opportunity there in a window to get the emissions reduced as much as possible. And if all of that isn't enough to sort of showcase the commercial case for ESG, I think if you just look at your own businesses now and you look at the amount of people, the amount of departments that are now looking at access to ESG type data, it gives you an idea of how important this information is and how critical this information is now to the different roles within your business. For different reasons, they all need it for different reporting reasons and whatever. So it is critical to make sure that it's accurate, it's reliable, and it's accessible to all. And ultimately, we need the ESG performance data to make ourselves more competitive, to save time, build trust, and ultimately reduce risk. Folks, hopefully that's kind of set the scene for the discussion. I'd like to introduce you to Lisa McIlvenna. As I said, Lisa is the Deputy Managing Director with Business in the Community. And Lisa works with all of her business members on all things ESG related, including the financial implications, probably the best way to put it, and how they can use it to drive their business commercially as well. So Lisa, welcome. Thank you for coming along today. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me all the way from my kitchen.
Not at all. Lisa, just in terms of kicking things off today, obviously we're looking at the commercial case for this. But one thing, before we get into that, one thing I'd be really interested in just sort of, I suppose, bottoming out, We're starting to see companies increasingly use the term ESG and sustainability sort of interchangeably. And I want to know, how do you feel about that? But also, how would you classify the difference? Does it matter? Is it more of the same?
Gosh, it's an essay just in that on its own about the development of terms and where they've come from, because ESG as a term or a phrase isn't new. It's been around for quite some time, but you're right, it's kind of exploded in terms of interest and use. And you said that some organizations are using ESG and sustainability interchangeably. That would actually make me very happy. What I'm concerned about is organizations that are coming forward and saying, okay, we've got our sustainability stuff in order, so now what do we need to do about ESG? And you're like, right, we're kind of pretty much talking about the same stuff. It's probably worth highlighting that, and this is maybe part opinion of mine, that the drive towards the terminology of ESG is driven by the markets and by investors. Investors really like ESG terminology, ESG related funds, and various the world that they work in and how that relates to ESG. It's something that is preferred by them. So naturally, some of the big hitters, whenever it comes to the stocks and shares world, are using that terminology. It starts to infiltrate down through supply chains, and we see that then starting to be mirrored in other organizations, and that's coming now to the business community here in Northern Ireland. Ultimately, sustainability is the goal that we're all trying to work towards. What has happened, the term sustainability in the past, is that it's come very attached to environmental work only, but in its purest sense, it really is much broader than that. And it's about, we just don't need to be sustainable environmentally, but we need to think about our people resources and our economic resources and lots of different aspects of sustainability. And ESG is just another way of talking about the types of activities that an organization should undertake in order to try and be sustainable. It's another term just thrown in just while we're getting comfortable with talking about responsible business or sustainability. Another one comes along, but it's ultimately the same thing in many ways. I'm not getting into the nuances of it, but it's ultimately referring to the same types of activity and driven by the investors primarily, as in terms of popularity, as I see it.
Yeah, no, fair point. And you're right. It's I suppose for me it's been useful because it clearly sets out under each of the banners what needs to be focused on and how they integrate with each other. So I think from that perspective, it's definitely useful for businesses. Lisa, with regard to your own members, and I know quite a few of them are construction companies, or certainly within the construction sector as well. With regard to your members, are you hearing ESG, sustainability, being discussed in the boardroom? And if so, like, what information are they looking for to help them make those strategic commercial decisions?
Well, if I take a step back, just for people on the call, about what I do and who I work with, and the context of that, just to kind of put my answer to you in context. So I work for an organization called Business in the Community, and we are a membership organization, and we work with businesses, several hundred businesses across the province, to try and support them to be responsible and sustainable, or the language that I should use now is to try and help them meet their ESG commitments in some shape or form. And we help organizations do that in a whole variety of ways. We've lots of off-the-shelf programs and support that organizations could tap into, but we also have a lot of in-house expertise that can help organizations figure out some of the more challenging parts of this, and how they can get around some of the barriers and more difficult parts. So you're right, we work with similar organizations. Often we work with them on the activity, and then you work with them on how to best capture and report on that activity. And construction is a big part of that. But across the board, yes, we're seeing ESG come through a lot more. And the extent and nature of the questions that we're getting around ESG varies hugely on a scale from, what does this terminology mean? We've been told we have to use it, and how does this fit with what we're already doing in terms of a sustainable business practice, right through to where we fall under TCFD and we have to report on this in a couple of months' time, and we don't know what that means and how do we go about capturing that. There's certainly an urgency all of a sudden, not across the board, but we're seeing an increased urgency of people wanting to talk about being sustainable, what ESG means, and how to do it and we'll maybe get to this, how to do it in a credible and reportable way rather than just talking about it, which would be a concern in some areas. But certainly a lot of our job in the past, and I'm being quite kind of, warts and all here, a lot of our job in business in the community sometimes is going in and trying to persuade organizations that this sustainability piece was something that they needed to think about. Now that door is most definitely open with 80-90% of the organizations that we are going to or talking to, and that is a big shift from where we were even a year ago or 18 months ago. We're definitely seeing a big shift. The only challenge, I think, well, one of the many challenges, but a challenge is happening at board level is, and I don't mean this in disrespect to some of the best business minds across the country, but what we're also seeing is that some practitioners or people that are leading in this activity are having challenges trying to persuade the board to look at ESG in its entirety, for instance, or to really broaden the way that they're reporting or the types of things that they're reporting on. So there's a bit of a push and pull happening depending on which organization that you're talking to.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I suppose, as you say, the door you used to have to push the door open to get in. And from that perspective, it's great, because when you actually look, at the amount of money that these companies have been investing in sustainability initiatives, yet there was no measurement of the impact. There was no understanding of, what it actually meant to their business. It was crazy. So it's good to know that we're at a point where it is now being discussed and it's being used strategically, particularly to drive the business forward commercially. But again, I share your concerns too. I think one of my concerns is the pace at which it's moving and the worry of leaving folks behind, so I think it's important that we all make sure that doesn't happen. And I think that's really where BITC come into their own, because it's almost that hand-holding, walking them through it, giving them a clear pathway, if you like, in terms of how they should navigate the whole thing. So
yeah, the presentation you just give is hugely informative, covered so many aspects and so many commercial drivers. But I can also imagine an organization that's coming to this relatively new, seeing all of that. And you're right, the language that we use sometimes doesn't help, but it's the language of this world. And you're right, there is a danger that we could leave some people behind. But once you kind of break past the language, and that carbon literacy piece that you referred to is hugely important in this. Once you break through that language, and that's what we're seeing with a lot of our members, saying, well, what that refers to is X, Y, and Z. And then there's so we're doing a good bit of this already. I said, this isn't necessarily new. It's just some of the parameters around it and the language that's being used is new, or maybe starting to push you a wee bit further, but there's no harm in that either.
Yeah, no, I agree. I suppose just curious as well, traditionally, I don't want to offend anyone on the call either, but traditionally the construction sector would have been quite slow to embrace change. And, not always the case, certainly there's been over the last couple of years.
All the emails you're going to get in the back of this, Liam.
trying to word this carefully. But what do you think it is? Because I don't think that's been the case with ESG or sustainability. I think they have grabbed it with both hands. And I suppose, why do you think is that the case for construction when they've been so slow in the past to embrace other things? Why? And is it the commercial potential, do you think, that they've recognized?
Yes, I agree. I've been in business in the community for far too long now, but from the start, the construction sector were the sector that were switched on to this. Not every aspect of it, but a much bigger percentage of it, more quickly than other organizations. And it's driven, yes, commercially, it's been driven by the market and by tenders and what's prescribed within those and the pre-qualifying and what that takes and what it means and so on. But I think it's not just, they've been really progressive in some of this space, and have kind of led the way for other sectors to look to say, all right, that's what it means about driving something through your supply chain, sometimes in a very supportive manner, or sometimes, right, you're not in the gang unless you do X, Y, and Z manner. There are different ways that the sector has achieved sustainability through their supply chain in construction, and there's been a lot of learning there for other sectors to follow suit. You're right, they have led the way, and most of it has been driven commercially, also by risk. No sector likes risk. Construction certainly don't like risk. There's far too much at stake. And that's reflected back on what we're seeing happening, I think, in the markets, and why investors are taking such a big interest in this. They don't like risk. And whenever we look at what's coming down the line in terms of preferences, legislation, it's pretty clear the way governments generally work in these spaces. They try to go softly, then they'll go soft legislation, and they still don't get to where they need to get to. They'll go hard legislation. And that type of approach encourages businesses to say, well, let's get ahead of this rather than be caught behind it. And I think that's what's happened in the construction sector, that they quickly saw some trends that were starting to come through, both legislatively, through the supply chain, and also in terms of where architects were going and thinking in terms of some really interesting, innovative, creative builds. And they moved to be the progressive, or a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of the construction companies moved to be the progressive ones in the sector that kind of met some of those demands, rather than responding to them as further down the line. But I agree, I think they've been hugely progressive, and they've got a lot of challenges too, in terms of what they procure and how they have to procure it, and particularly in terms of materials and so on. There's a lot of challenges there, but that's where a full supply chain has to really get their heads together and try and find some solutions.
Yeah, huge challenges there as well in the next couple of years, even just around the embodied carbon challenge of the products and the materials that are arriving at the gate, calculating that. Often what is designed and specified as designed is not always what arrives at the gate, which, for cost reasons, obviously the decision was made, but now the potential impact on a net zero target around that build could, there could be a massive risk, just back to your point there about risk. So there's big challenges, and we're only at the start of this, but I do think that the sector have really stepped out. And I think as well, the tendering process has almost led us down this road a little bit. So we've maybe been used to it a little bit more than maybe other sectors that maybe don't work in that space. We have been reporting across particularly the environmental and the social aspects now for quite a few years, and the policing of that by the client has increased. So the accuracy and the reliability of that data has become more and more important as well. So I think there's no better sector, I suppose, well positioned to, and it's back to that point where there is real opportunities here for companies to step out and lead,
Yeah, that's it. And, the likes of yourselves are helping them capture all of that, to help be able to plot out what the improvements are year on year, to be able to align what your outputs are versus your longer term net zero strategy. All the stuff that SustainIQ are doing is really important in this space, and it's very important and this is a broader concern. This is the kind of thing I just think about whenever I'm having a cup of coffee and my husband thinks I'm really odd. But it's the comparing like with like, and making sure that the measurements that you're getting stand up. And that's some of the challenges that we have further down the line, I think, in the bigger markets, that we have all of these beautiful ESG reports, but how do you compare one to the next? What is good, what is not? And it's the potential to be able to start to use the data that's coming out from the likes of yourselves, or we have a core benchmark slightly different, but being able to then be able to say, right, well, how does that stack up against others in my industry or others in other sectors? Like, what is it really? It's a so what question. What does it really mean, and are we performing well or not? But you can't even get to that type of analysis unless you've got the right kind of data, which is, I suppose, why we're here.
Absolutely. It's critical. I suppose that leads nicely into my next sort of
so I throw you a nice segue.
Nice segue there. Yeah, well done. Thank you for that. But it's something that I think in my own career over this last while, we've always had to navigate it carefully, just to make sure that, because there was always a lot of pushback, I suppose. And the question is, is it acceptable for companies to use sustainability, use their ESG performance as a tool to increase competitiveness and, I suppose, forward, their competitiveness within the marketplace, if you like? Because, in the past, there's been examples where companies that have done that, there's been a huge pushback publicly, but we're in a very different space now, and procurement in particular is really driving the competitiveness around the whole ESG agenda. So just keen to get your thoughts on that. Do you think it's okay for them to do that, or are we starting to straddle a dangerous sort of line?
I think it's 100% okay,
Good.
but not everybody does. And I think what this gets into is the cynicism space. So just generally in life, some people like to be cynical. So if anyone comes along and says, I'm good at X, Y, and Z, that becomes the other person or party's mission to try and find a hole in whatever it is that they've claimed, or to say, well, good for you, but do you remember way back 25 years ago, you did this one thing? And that can be a tendency. And that definitely has been exacerbated by social media, easy access of information, transparency challenges, or not, greater transparency in some ways. Certainly difficult to hide anything compared to what it used to be 20 or 30 years ago. But my answer to all of this always has been, I'll come back to this part in just a second, if they are doing it, then they should be shouting about it. Is this not, and I know that doesn't always align with everyone's culture and the way that they want to be as an organization. I completely get that. But I think if an organization is contemplating, can we use this commercially and should we be talking about it, then we absolutely should. The markets in London are rewarding companies depending on how good they are at this stuff. The market is telling people, we want you to tell us how good you are and to show us how good you are. And in theory, the economics around this will eventually result in this being a good thing for you rather than not. I always just err on the side of, well, isn't it good that they're doing something, rather than the ones that are doing nothing, and or even worse, the organizations that are doing irresponsible things that are trying to keep it hidden. Like that's where we should be focusing our attention if we're going to get cynical. The challenge with it is substantiating it. And making sure that as an organization, if you are going to use it commercially, that you are A, doing it, B, doing it well, and C, measuring it in an objective way and communicating it in an objective way as much as you can. And that's where the good old greenwashing term is. I'm sure there'll be an emergence of a new term relating specifically to ESG washing. I haven't come across it yet, but it's probably out there. Is it out there? I haven't seen it, but it'll coming. But that's where the difficulty is. I've definitely seen some organizations starting to proclaim that this is where we're going to be by 2030, this is where we're going to be by 2040. And whenever you push to say, well, where are you now? They can't articulate that. And that would concern me whenever it comes to talking about your credentials. I think if you're going to do it, you have to really have your house in order, and to work with, whether it's SustainIQ or whoever, to make sure that you have the numbers to back up your claims, because someone will definitely ask.
Absolutely. I think greenwashing, obviously it's been around for a while, but I think the next 10 years, the risk of greenwashing, and I personally, I think the only way to protect yourself, to protect your business, is to have the data to back it up.
Yeah.
So when, it's not even if, it's when that accusation comes in, that you can stand over your messaging. Yeah. Because you've got the data to back it up. You're right. If you have nothing to substantiate it, then you're, the impact to brand, the impact to it's you couldn't even put a potential cost to that. So I do think the next 10 years, I think it's important that I completely agree. I think companies should be using their performance to drive themselves forward commercially, absolutely. But I think on the back of that, making sure that they can stand over it, that they've got the data to back it up, and therefore reducing the potential risk of an accusation of greenwashing to the business, to the brand.
So the market has a long way to go, although I think it'll go quite quickly. But a lot of the ESG ratings and rankings that you see coming out from like BlackRock, whoever, it's like a black box at the moment. And kind of some information comes in, and for some reason this is the rating and ranking that comes out, and it's not quite clear how things have been calculated, and or sometimes worryingly just calculated on public disclosure information only. Whereas being able to get into it and to use the likes of yourselves or someone who's, or whether it be in-house, whatever it might be, to be able to really capture and monitor and be able to stand over the data and then eventually make a communication decision on it, then is probably the right kind of trajectory around that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that makes sense. So, Lisa, I suppose based on all of that, and we've discussed a lot, and I suppose reading between the lines is quite clear the direction of travel here around ESG, sustainability, and how businesses are now starting to use it commercially and arm themselves with the tools and the data to make that happen. What do you think the impact could be, even financially, for those that sit back and do nothing in 2022? You know, with all the hype around COP and everything that's happened over this last while, what do you think that impact could be if they don't make a start here today?
I would be concerned. I think now you can catch up on some of this stuff quite quickly. I would say that as a caveat, that you can kind of get going quite quickly if you're talking to the right people. But without doubt, industries and sectors and entire markets are heading down this road quite quickly, and organizations work in different ways. So I always look back to whenever we talked about the responsible business world, or CSR as it was back then, and why organizations did it. And you look across all the research, it's generally three main reasons: either because they felt good about it, they wanted to do it out of the goodness of their heart. And there's a bit of that around this ESG stuff with some organizations that always done it because they maybe have an owner or an investor that really believes in this. They did it strategically because they could see that's where the market was going and they wanted to get ahead of it and to own it for themselves rather than be told what to do. And then the final group are the ones that did it defensively or were forced to do it. And then whenever it gets to that stage, you have to do it the way that you've been told to do it, or you have to do it the way that the rest of your competitors are doing it because they have formed the mold now that the rest of the industry expect. So I think if you're sitting as an organization and looking around and seeing businesses in your sector or other sectors starting to move in this space, I would get in the mix and try to influence the conversation and make it work for you as an organization, rather than letting others get 6 or 9 months down the road, start to set the standards for what is reported upon and when and how, etc. And then for it to be dictated to you eventually by either the market or by law, because that's eventually what happens. So I would say get in the mix. And if there is some caution around it, then take advice. I wouldn't just jump straight in. I would take advice from Business and Community or SustainIQ. There's plenty of organizations out there who are more than happy to talk about this stuff at length. And take advice and make sure that you're doing it in a way that works for your business and you're not just doing it because everybody else is.
Yeah.
That's that old phrase.
And I suppose that leads nicely into the final question, really, which is just around those barriers. You've already touched on a few of them and the importance of just, jumping in. But, in terms of those main barriers that are maybe preventing companies, because sometimes, it's easy to be critical of those businesses that sit back and maybe don't take those decisions. And when you actually drill down into it, sometimes it's fear, just the unknown. And you're right, just jumping in, getting familiar with the conversation, watching what others are doing is a good way to make a start. Are there any other kind of big key barriers out there as you see it that we could all maybe sort of help together by working more collaboratively, to sort of help overcome?
Oh, here comes the wish list. I know we were tight for time, so I'll not take ages, but to start, consensus in language, consensus in measurement, and consensus on how we report on it. A clear-cut consensus across public sector on what it is they actually want for Northern Ireland economy at large in terms of procurement, where we move circular economy or not, or what are we trying to get to in terms of a longer-term goal. So it's those, they're big things, but I think if we could come to a broad consensus, even around terminology and what are the expectations from one sector to the next and what it means and what good looks like, I think we would be winning if we could get to that. But I do think, as you kind of implied, that a lot of the challenge can be a cultural piece, it can be a priorities piece. A lot of these organizations are just trying to get from one day to the next, and it's about, and sometimes that can be helpful to bring in a third party to kind of independently say, like, this is what's happening, there's no judgment here, but this is the direction we're seeing see things going, and just to kind of give a lay of the land to organizations and let them kind of decipher what that means for them can help sometimes shortcut a few internal conversations.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, look, as well, anyone can look out now at companies they've really embraced it, and you can see how they are using it to drive themselves forward commercially in the market, make themselves more competitive, taking the leadership roles in certain areas. You know, even as I touched on there, the likes of those BREEAM and LEED buildings, which are becoming a premium, but then that's driving the refurb market. So there's huge opportunity there. So I think it's easy for folks to look out now and see how others are doing it, but also see the benefits from getting started, and how it really helps drive the business forward. So I think that in itself, hopefully would entice them to take the next step and really just make a start. So Lisa, I can't believe it, but it is nearly 1:15 already. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to see if we've any questions here from guys. So there's one in from Tony Duff. Do you think a pass or standard for integrated ESG may be in pipeline to assure process of declarations? Should there be a criminal legislation around greenwashing to prevent and promote accountability? That's an interesting one. What do you think? What do you think of that, Lisa? First of all,
criminal legislation. Well, eventually sure, advertising standards could probably weigh in eventually, but they have to know, you know, what it is that they're trying to deal with. There are certainly efforts to try and get a concerted ESG standard certification underway, and that's happening both at a European and global level. But if any previous attempt, if we can learn anything from previous attempts to try and certify or benchmark or produce a standard for sustainability and or corporate responsibility that was going to be all encompassing, it'll be quite a long time. What will probably happen is that around the TCFD, we'll start to see some certifications come through there already in the mix. So I think that may come first. If you were to follow a logic, then after that, there will be other like add-on bits that will come that will eventually result in full ESG external accreditation. But I think we're swimming on our own for this year at least.
Yeah, yeah, and to be honest, I think, you know, criminal legislation, you know, would help maybe divert for sure. But I think even bigger than that is the risk to your company, to your brand. People, you know, that, you know, it doesn't take much now online these days across the socials. So I think the commercial implications to your brand, to your business, to your customer base, to your supply base, it's too big. It's too big a risk, I think. So that in itself, I think, should definitely steer people away from greenwashing. Regarding the standards piece, we just got a comment in there. The clients we typically work with know they have to deal with the ESG and want to do it proactively. However, there are lots of accreditations listed there, BREEAM, LEEDs, and so on. And so it's difficult to know which is the best for what. And that's a good point. When you break down ESG across the different sectors, there are so many different standards that companies and organizations are having to work to, based upon their client base or their jurisdiction that they're operating in or whatever it might be. So it could be a difficult one, just to end up with but hopefully even a clear sort of set of standards that should be followed would certainly make things a lot easier to track as well.
And there is a certain, I think a lot of these standards and accreditations are well established at this stage. Some of them are commercial entities and want to remain that way. And then there are others who are, although probably not known necessarily externally, but are having conversations behind the scenes to kind of say, right, longer term here, it makes sense for us to work together than it does to work against each other. So can we be clever about how we can start to merge some of these together? But I agree, it's a minefield, particularly in the construction sector, but not exclusively. But yeah, particularly in construction, there's a lot.
I agree. No, thank you. Lisa, thank you very much for your time. Really, really appreciate it. No, it was a great discussion. Again, you're very much you're so knowledgeable in this space. You're dealing with it day in, day out with your client base, and it's great to know that BITC offer this support for their members. So look, I would encourage everyone on the call today to check them out on online, BITCNI, to just to see some of the services that they can provide. So Lisa, thank you very, very much. Thank you, folks. Just to wrap up, a little bit about ourselves. SustainIQ, as I said, we're a ESG sustainability reporting software solution, and we operate across 4 key pillars: our procurement pillar, our environmental pillar, our people and diversity pillar, and community impact and partnering pillar. So across those 4 pillars, we've broke it down, and we've made it really, really easy for our customers to track their performance using a very simple app and software solution. So it helps compile all this information centrally, which means everyone that needs access to it, all those people I mentioned earlier in the presentation within your organization that need access to that information, have very easy access to it through a dashboard. So look, we're here to help. We're happy to speak to anyone on the call today, to maybe showcase how SustainIQ could potentially help your businesses on your ESG journey. We are operating right across the UK and Ireland, and we've got folks there that can easily meet with any of you. So look, we'll send on the presentation afterwards, and we'll include our contact details there for anyone interested in maybe having a conversation with ourselves after that. So look, thank you all again, and really appreciate you joining the webinar. Hope you found it useful. My contact details and so on will be issued out after the webinar. So if you have any further questions that maybe you want to ask afterwards, please do. Let me know. I'd be happy to get back to you. But for now, thank you very much, and take care. Goodbye.